Hey there, welcome back. This is our next module in AZ-2007, where it's all about using, understanding, building code, writing code, and in this module, generating documentation using GitHub Copilot tools. Now to start with, what is this module covering? I can imagine that the title is pretty clear. Imagine you're a developer. You're joining a team as a new developer. Maybe you're a senior developer already, but you're still joining a new cool development exercise where you're working on building the next great AI-inspired, AI-influenced application. Now, one of the challenges that we have as developers and DevOps engineers is writing code. I understand, and if you watched other modules, you know that I'm not a developer as such. I'm a technical trainer, right? But I do like writing code for the last 3 years. But the part that I don't like in my development project is writing documentation. So isn't it cool that nowadays, thanks to GitHub Copilot, we actually have a tool available, a tool at hand that allows us to help us with that. And I'm saying helping because you're still in control. You're the developer, you read through code, and you can analyze the documentation. So in short, what this module is going to cover is the topic, the pain point almost you could say, of writing documentation. It's not just writing documentation, but it's going to allow you to understand code and really explaining code for you, which could be beneficial for any kind of development experience you have. So with that, let's jump in right away. Now, before going into the actual presentation, and if you watched the previous module, you already know that I like to get you into the topic of this module, piquing your brain a little bit, where you could help me writing down some keywords on the whiteboard. And obviously, if this is watched as a recording, you could do the same on your end. Take a little piece of paper and pen, write it down, or take some notes on your computer. So the next question here is, what are some of the key pieces about your application that you're developing that you should try and document? Now, documentation is an interesting topic, so I guess we're going to have quite some interesting keywords here. The first one I'm thinking of is obviously the project overview. Like, what is the project about? What are we building? Is it a sales app? Is it a HR application? Is it something else, a mobile app to do anything that helps your business moving forward? Is it an AI-inspired app? So that's where you're going to write down the high level, the overview of the project. Next to that, I'm thinking of coding standards, which could be your framework. We're using .NET. We're only building .NET 9 applications nowadays, or obviously some other language, not all that important for now, together with the packages. And this could also be seen as your SBOM, so the software bill of material. Moving down a little bit more in our development stack, you cannot run an application without deploying it or installing it. So we're going to create an install guide, which might be relevant for our infrastructure team. And obviously, we're also going to document the actual architecture. What are the virtual machines? Are we running containers? We need high availability load balancers, all that fun stuff. Then moving down on, I would say closer to the code itself, we're going to code our code. From there, we could talk about documenting like APIs, for example, using Open API as a standard, or maybe still relying on Swagger, nothing wrong with that. Documenting the testing, the unit testing, functional testing you want to validate could be a good one. Maybe as well end user documentation. It's all fine to build an app, but if you don't explain to the user how they actually have to use it, might be giving them a less good experience. And then also thinking in development mode, the change log where, for example, source control commit messages towards like GitHub repos could be a good one. So I think that's a pretty extensive list. Obviously, not all of these will be covered in this module, but we're going to focus on documenting your project. So with that, let's switch back to our presentation and get started with this module. So first of all, within thinking about how Copilot is thinking about understanding your code and how it can help you in your day-to-day developer job. It's on one side, documenting code, on the other side, explaining code. Now, I gotta be honest, again, I told you I'm not a developer per se, and I relied actually more on explaining code initially than documenting it. First of all, the apps I'm building are typically demo apps to showcase capabilities from the Azure platform, from AI, from Copilot in all the classes that I'm delivering. Where now I found some sample code on the internet, going to even the official Microsoft Azure GitHub repository, for example, downloading or cloning an application code, running it, woohoo, it works, but I have no idea exactly what it does. That's where I moved into GitHub Copilot and asking it to explain code for me. And it's going to bring in a lot of really cool features because, for example, you allow it to just explain a snippet of code. It's not explaining the whole project, although, by the way, it can actually help you with that. And it's just getting you into that zone to become more productive, to become more efficient in your job. You could also use that as a learning tool. That's, again, the other thing I did. Or even shifting across development languages, where you might be proficient in Python or Go or .NET or any other, but for some reason you shifted companies, maybe you shifted platforms, which also means that maybe you need to switch language. Where now you can again ask GitHub Copilot to help you explain code, and based on that it's like, oh, that's how it works, now I do get it, and from there moving on. On the other side, documenting code is literally providing a transcript, a description if you want, of what the code is actually doing. And again, with a lot of cool examples that I'll walk you through, a little bit on slides, but then heavily shifting to a set of demos again. So with that, we set the scene on documenting code and explaining code. Now, how does this technically work? It's almost becoming natural. Again, that's where the power of generative AI comes in. Using your natural language, which means just approach it in the way you would reach out to your colleagues. You would literally ask them for this specific project, for this specific set of code, right, in my development environment, which we now call the workspace. So what you're going to do is, inside your development environment, you're going to rely on GitHub Copilot, traditional functionality, or using the chat conversation, which I would personally recommend. And you would do add workspace and then asking //explain. It's going to provide you a description, and you could actually pinpoint a specific file. Obviously, I would assume that you already have all your development source files open in your development environment, but you could open up a file and then maybe think about like, oh, wait a minute, I got my config JSON file. It doesn't mean that you need to open that file to get an explanation. So what you would do there is, again, add workspace /explain, and then using the hashtag to point to a specific file, providing file and the actual name of the file. And I even think it's opening up a little list of files that you recently opened as well. Obviously, the same works for a code selection. So you go into your code, you select line 15 all the way to line 70, and if you want, yes, all the way down to line 700, and again, opening up the chat conversation and asking /explain or explain selection. And again, try to approach this as natural language based as possible, where you could do something like, tell me about the Node.js functions that I'm using in this set of code. Or you could do something like, can you help me explaining what this set of code is doing? Or even if you do not have the code yet, could you explain me how to integrate this kind of feature, how to rewrite my HTML for like a web application? And again, so many other cool things. And then last, you could actually do the same directly from within the terminal. Now, instead of using the add workspace, pointing at the whole solution, you could say, you could now do add terminal /explain, and it's going to show you the explanation messages coming in from the terminal as well. Some other options here, again, already talked about it. We have the chat view, positioned that in a previous module, talked about inline chat, and then also the smart action, where it's really going to use a lot of those built-in, again, GitHub Copilot Chat capabilities directly from within your code set. And that's what the screenshot here is showing you. I'm inside my Visual Studio Code. I'm inside my actual code description where you have all the code syntax, right? You're just going to select it. That's what the green lines of code actually represent. And on top of that, we have our GitHub Copilot chat conversation. And remember, you're still in control, which means that it's up to you to accept the suggestions, accept the changes. That's in short how it works. Now, if you think about how to get started, I talked about integrating the workspace, talked about integrating specific files, talked about embedding the chat experience inside a snippet of code. But what if you want to literally get a higher level view, explain me my total project? What you're going to do here is, again, relying on the chat conversation option. You're going to open up chat view. You're going to use that at workspace. And from there, you're going to write some natural language inspired prompt, and you're going to ask it to explain code for you. You're going to ask it to document code for you. And again, it all becomes so natural. Next to that, and that's also pretty interesting, it's going to provide you the description, like the documentation feature, right? And then from there, you could actually do something like, can you rewrite this in Markdown syntax? Why Markdown? Because I think if you're a bit familiar with how GitHub repositories are working, they sort of expect a README file. So why would you spend time on copy-pasting the documentation and then spending time on your own to rewrite it in Markdown? Rely on the power of generative AI to actually help you with that. So that's another little tip and trick, I would say. Now we're back here with documenting, explaining. Again, what's the main difference there? I would say it really depends on the scenario. Documenting to me means I'm going to create a description of what the code is doing. I'm going to create a description of what the project is about, maybe to just have it documented, allowing your peer developers to get up to speed as fast as you did, thanks to having that documentation. Where the explain features, to me is more like, I'm going to help you as an individual developer to understand the already existing code set, to understand what the project is about, what are the different requirements that we have, what are some of the, best practices we already have out of the organization, and really bringing that in for you as a learning tool. And obviously you could really mix and match. So you could start with explain code for me using the explanation that GitHub Copilot generates for you, and then moving that into documentation as well. And try to, again, approach this as natural as possible. And you're going to find out that's at least what I've been doing over the last year and a bit, is really switching back and forth, copying some code that you find as a sample from one of your colleagues, maybe from an older application, maybe something you find on the internet. And before you just copy, paste, and integrate it into your existing code, try to start with explain this for me, making sure that you really know what that little snippet of code is doing. And then again, the same for documenting, keeping something at hand to help your colleagues to maybe go back to the code at some point in time. And instead of you needing to dig in, okay, I remember I actually helped writing this application about a year ago, maybe even already 3 months ago, right? Nobody remembers all the details from all the applications you're building. And that's where the documentation feature is going to be super beneficial. That's pretty much it on setting the scene, explain code, document code. So I think it's about time to switch to another demo and walking you through a couple of different scenarios. I technically have 3 different demos where I'm going to start with explaining code, documenting code, and showing you as natural as possible how I'm using it within my sample application. By the way, we call these demos, but feel free to go to our GitHub repository, downloading the code, and start working throughout the demos I'm doing. You can replicate all those steps on your own machine as well. So in this first demo, it's all about using the basics, I would say, of our GitHub Copilot, and mainly working towards documenting the project, documenting code. Now, although it's presented as a demo, you could actually follow along, and if you don't want to do this during the live stream, you could actually do this in your own time. Now, what we have out of our content team is the sample application that we're going to use. It's a console-based application using .NET code, and we're going to use it to build up like a sales reporting, like a quarterly sales overview with obviously a few other tweaks here and there. Allow me to start with sharing some explanation on where you can actually find all the source code. So the source code itself is open source like pretty much anything else we have in our Microsoft Learning resources, right? Where you could navigate to github.com/Microsoft Learning and then /AZ-2007. That's the code for the accelerating application development with GitHub Copilot. And from there, you're going to navigate to the downloads subfolder here within the Learn module exercises. And you're going to find a few projects where, in our case, we're going to use sampleapps.zip. So you're going to download that little package, and from there, we're going to extract it. And you're going to see that we do have a lot of different code snippets here. Some of them are literally pretty empty, where we're going to rely on GitHub Copilot to actually help us documenting, writing code, and then later on optimizing code as well. And some other ones are actually there with already pre-built code snippets, sometimes an already fully workable scenario, where we again going to rely on GitHub Copilot to help us in our day-to-day job as a developer. So with that, let's get started with our first actual demo, I would say. So what we're going to do here is mainly showing you what GitHub Copilot Chat can actually help you with, understanding, explaining the entire workspace, like this is what my project is about. Next to that, explaining specific code snippets, identifying specific code lines or selecting sections inside code, explaining errors if something is not working as it should be, suggesting a way to fix the problem, and a lot of other really cool scenarios. So I'm going to start with opening up my first sample folder. So from within the sample apps, I'm working with APL 2007 M2 sample 1. And again, feel free to follow along, then maybe pausing the video every now and then. So I'm inside my Visual Studio Code. My folder view is open. And from here, we have a few different files. I'll make it a little bit bigger here. So we have our .NET C# project file. We have the Visual Studio Solution file. We got a few XML files, and we have our main window classes file as well. So one of the first starting points, remember, our imaginary use case is that you're joining an existing development team. We already have snippets of an application. Our team has been developing it for a while now, and you're joining the team and you want to get up to speed. So one of the easiest ways to really get up to speed about what the app is about is now navigating to our GitHub Copilot Chat. And as you know, you could start interacting here, running a prompt where it could be as easy as, I'll make it again a little bit bigger, add workspace, which means, hey, GitHub Copilot, I want you to start looking into the totality of the project and using your natural language, explain the project. What it's going to do here is taking a couple of seconds, sometimes it might take a little bit longer, and it starts generating an explanation what this sample project is about. Now, I'm not going to read out all the results from the chat completion here. Obviously, on your end, I would say maybe spend some time in the sample code and preferably in your own production code to really see how powerful it actually is. But just spending a couple of seconds in what that explanation actually looks like. So first of all, it's going to start with looking at the project file itself, which I think makes sense because that's really the root, you could say, of developing your application. So it's going to highlight the key characteristics. So it's recognizing the project settings, the target framework, where in this case, I think one of the tasks we might look into later on is actually updating our .NET 6 framework, but totally fine for now. Looking at the sample solution file as well. And then from there, logically and chronologically, it's going through individual application files. Next to that, it's providing pointers to the actual code files. So if you've been using like Microsoft Copilot work version or like within M365, right? It's doing pretty much the same from a behavior perspective, where it's providing you the answer and also highlighting the source where that information actually comes from. And then later on, it's moving down like lower in the application hierarchy, you could say, highlighting the main window files. And then last, also providing additional information about my object bin folder, like testing code, building code, rebuilding, compiling, and then summarizing the key components within our actual application files. Now, the next step here could be like, okay, now I have a view on this total project and I want to get more insights on specific files. So one way to do that is obviously selecting the file itself. It's going to open it up here, where now we could do another little prompt inside our prompt window, where we're still going to point at the workspace. We're going to use the action keyword explain, and now adding the hashtag file keyword to it, colon, and then pointing at the actual file name, which in our case could be window.xaml.cs. Now the experience will be about the same as what we had before, but this time it's providing a pretty complete, accurate explanation what that main window file is about. So we started with the high-level project and then gradually moving down to a subsection within our application code. So again, you could take a minute to review the response, but again, it's not always that important, at least not as part of the demo, what it actually comes up with. But you could see that it starts to analyze the actual content. So what are the key components? It's recognizing our HTTP client. Next to that, our baseline URLs, highlighting some button clicking actions that we have, and literally analyzing each and every method. If I would navigate to the actual code file here, you can see that it's nicely looping through. Another nice one is that now we moved from the project within a file, and it means that we could now move into an even lower section, which means we're going to grab a specific method. So I'm moving inside my code file itself, and I'm locating one of the so many methods in this file. In this case, the sum page size async method. And what we can do here is selecting a little snippet of code. So just selecting a couple of lines. And then from here, selecting and now using a smart action, which means I'm going to right click inside my code window. I'm going to select Copilot. And I already have a set of keywords here where now I'm going for the explain action. And again, it's coming back with a pretty detailed, accurate description, specifically describing what this selected snippet of code is about. Another pretty useful feature I would say that we have is detecting errors and actually explaining what's happening. So if I go back into my code, and I move back into my start sum page. Where do we have it? Over here. You can see that here it's already marked in squiggly red lines, like the typical Visual Studio Code behavior. And what we used to have up till now is view the problem and quick fix. That's like the IntelliSense being built in Visual Studio Code, where now we also have a new section here called Fix Using Copilot. So again, it's using the shortcut keyboard key Control+I, or if you want, let me try and show you that again. We could actually navigate directly to it from here. And what it's now using is the keyword fix. So you could open up the Copilot chat and then selecting code using /fix, and it's going to do the same. Where now the benefit I would say is that I'm actually triggering Copilot Chat from within my code window. So I don't have to switch around back and forth between the chat window on the side, going back into my code and switching continuously. So without doing anything specific, it's recognizing the problem, so it cannot implicitly convert that code string, explaining the problem, so it is because source returning something, so we need to await. Next to that, what it's doing is also providing a possible answer. What it did, and it's a little bit harder to see here, it's highlighting the line in green, so following the source control look and feel the experience to highlight if code got changed, if you would look into like the Git history. And what it did is adding the await keyword here. Now, what I mentioned in the presentation multiple times already is that it's just a Copilot, nothing wrong about it, right? But you're still in control. So this is a suggestion, and you can see that it actually fixes the issue. But if you don't like it, if you don't want it, if it would not be accurate enough, then you would select this card here, like, thank you for trying, but I'm not going to accept it. Where obviously in this case, since it looks like it's fixing the problem, we're going to accept it and our application error is gone. Another way to do that is from here, going back in chat, using explain what we used before. I didn't have the add workspace, so now it's looking into the open file. You could also see that down here, it's actually using the current file because that's where you could say the cursor is positioned. So I'm going to do explain. And again, using your natural language, why is the selection causing an error? Or could you explain what's going wrong? Or could you help me fixing this issue? And so on and so on. Now, in this case, since I didn't really have any, I still have an error here in the results text box. It's now again looking into like the totality of your application, looking into the project and trying to validate like probably everything that's wrong inside our code. So I'm going to give it a minute to see what it actually comes back with. So after giving it a little bit of time, it nicely came back. So again, we started with selecting our sum page size async, like 20, 25 lines of code. And from there, just based on our pretty high level generic prompt, why is the selection causing an error? The key thing here is that you do not have to provide a lot of details in the chat window, like writing your prompts, right? Not making prompt engineering too complex, and it's still allowing you to come up with a pretty accurate answer. So what I did here, I'll make it a little bit bigger. It's again seeing, like I used one reference, literally the specific method inside our code snippet here, line 50 to 86, reading through the different error messages and then providing the explanation how to update the controls, how to modify the namespace, and then updating our method as well. And then nicely providing the code solution. Now, since I started in the chat window, again, the experience is slightly different from what I showed you before because I'm not using the inline chat conversation. I'm using the little pane on the side, which now means that I can read through code. I can still go back and forth validating like what is actually different. But now if you want to actually use it, remember in the previous step, we had the accept button to really accept the changes. And that's where now you're going to rely on any of these little shortcut buttons where you can do apply editor. So it's going to move in the changes in your actual editor view. You can select insert at the cursor. So this is probably pretty valid if you want to add like new code, and you could also still do the traditional copy paste step as well. So that's pretty much it for this first part of the demo, where it was all about navigating, showing you the difference between GitHub Copilot Chat on the right-hand side, using the inline chat, using it for creating documentation, providing some explanation, high-level project, and gradually moving down all the way into specific code selections. So for this next part of the demo, we're still using the same sales statistics console application, right, that we're building. If you're following along, I'm still using the AZ-2007 M2 sample 1 application, the same one that I used in my previous demo. But this time, instead of using some of the explanation features, relying on some of the fix-it-for-me code snippets out of GitHub Copilot, we're now relying on project documentation. So what we're going to do is, again, relying on natural language running in the background. So we go back to our chat window, and from here, we're going to trigger some of the built-in keywords. So since we want to get documentation about the full project we're working on, we're again starting with add workspace. And from here, relying on prompt engineering, where I would say, again, don't overthink it, don't make it more complex than it should be, because now you could run something as easy as document the project. Or document this for me, because it already knows that you're relying on the full project because of that workspace. Now, what it's going to do here is, again, could take a little bit longer on your end, but it's providing project documentation. Now, outside of using generative AI, to me, again, documentation, what we also started the module with on the whiteboard, is I need an overview of the project. I want to get information about the files maybe within. I want to get an overview of some code snippets. What are the objects? What's the purpose of the app? And all that is nicely listed up here. It's going to look into the project code files, and it's going to start recognizing the main components. So there is an HTTP client. There is an integration with URLs. We do have our button clicks, which probably is one of the main actions inside your application behavior, and everything is nicely getting listed up. We could take it to another little spin here, where we could also ask for workspace document project dependencies. So we started pretty high level, describe the project for me, and now we're looking into the actual development aspect of it. And I know you could say, like, well, that's not really rocket science, because in the end, it's just opening the CS project file, right? But what it's going to do here is still providing you a pretty good description about the project dependencies. It recognizes its Windows Presentation Foundation app using .NET 6, and then also highlighting the actual details of that CS project file. From there, it's looking into all the different actual packages we have, and it's also looking into our build, rebuild, compile folder, and validating a lot of details about what we actually have inside the bin and object folder as well. You could also integrate, I would say, the expectation of your documentation a little bit. So if I do something like, can you rewrite, zoom in a bit here, can you rewrite the documentation in Markdown format so I can copy it into a GitHub README file? It's not changing the content, but it's going to change the layout. So the response is exactly the same, but instead of now nicely presenting me the, I would say, HTML-based friendly layout inside the chat window, it's now turning it into Markdown format. Where now from here, it's nothing more than just selecting it. If you want to grab everything, that's fine. You could also use that copy button here on top and then moving it into the README. Now, I still provided, I would say, a little bit of too much information. Like, can you move it into Markdown? I want to use it in my GitHub README file. So you could, again, optimize your prompts and using something like add workspace, generate a README document to be used as repo documentation. For now, again, it's once more doing the same, but it's already adding a little label to it, like this is the readme.m, like the expectation from the GitHub file. And again, everything is nicely in there. You could, again, copy paste this into your README file. And from there, I think it's still, to me, one of the most mind-blowing features. You as a developer, you join the project, you don't really know anything about the existing code, you have no idea what the history of the development work that's already been done inside the app is looking like. And now just by running that one easy prompt, add workspace, document the project, it's providing you all key details that you need. And then the next step, moving that into Markdown layout, README file, and again, just a couple of easy prompts and just taking only a couple of seconds and being done with it. So that's all I wanted to show you in this second demo. So for this last part of the demo, we're still in the documentation topic, where in the previous one, it was all about the project documentation, where now I'm going to show you a little bit more how to use the same concept, but using it from within our inline code window itself. So not relying on the chat that much anymore, but now changing the documentation as part of our actual development code syntax. I'm still in the same project, our AZ-2007 M2 sample, the exact same one that we used before, and I'm inside my main code file, the main window, XAML.cs file here. So I'm going to open my chat window again, and once more you had a few different options to do that. So you could use the little Copilot friend icon here, or using the keyboard shortcuts. You already know that. We start from workspace. And again, I'll make it a little bit bigger if you're following along, so you can actually see what's happening in that little chat box. So we could do something like workspace, and then using the hashtag selection. Although I didn't really select a specific part of the code, but since I only have one file open, it would actually recognize that as a selection. And then from there, completing the prompt using natural language, because what we want to get out of this is generating inline code documentation. Now, since we're in the chat window, you already know from previous parts in the demo that it's actually reusing the existing code you already have and adding that into the chat experience. But now out of our little prompt, it's providing inline documentation for each method, in this case for the button click method and all the other snippets in our application. If you're happy with the suggestions, remember you're in control, it's the Copilot, you're the main pilot, right? You can scroll up to the start of the chat window and from there accepting apply editor, and what it's going to do here is moving all the suggested documentation inside the actual code file. To show you that we can do the same directly from within the code file, I'm first going to save this. And let's do something for our onStart button click method here. So I'm inside my code view, and to show you, I could actually close the chat window on the side. There we go. From here, I'm triggering Copilot Chat using the same Control-I, and I could use one of the integrated keywords here. We already used /explain in previous demos. We already did a little bit with the fixing, so now I can talk a little bit about using the forward doc. And what it's going to do is generating documentation. If at least I kick it off, there we go. Now, since I selected the onStart button click, it's about the same as the previous keyword selection, right? So what it's going to do here is, on top of the actual method, which I assume most of you developers are doing already without using GitHub Copilot, it's now adding a few lines of comments. If you're happy with them, you can add them straight in. And from there, it's nicely explaining what the next sequence of method code is actually going to do. So it's recognizing it's a start button, most probably based on the naming convention we're using. It's explaining it's handling the click event. It also disables the start button once the process is running. And the main task here is using it to summarize the page sizes. And then also recognizing parameters where it's going to provide some details what the parameters are actually based on or what they should look like as part of your code. So that's, I would say, everything I wanted to show you in this demo. Pretty long, pretty heavy. We had 3 main sections, using the first one to explain the project. Next to that, moving into documenting the project. And then in this last shorter one, it was doing the same, performing documentation task, but straight from within our inline code window. So that, let's switch back to our presentation. Awesome. So with that, we're at the end of this module where it was all about using GitHub Copilot to not only help you explaining already existing code set, but also using it to help you as a developer and DevOps engineer to start documenting and helping how to better understand your code. As always at the closing, it's not just done for you, right? Because we provide additional links here on screen, allowing you to continue your own learning at your own pace. The first link is pointing to the official GitHub Copilot documentation at docs.github.com/copilot. The second one here is bringing you back into GitHub Copilot integration into Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. By the way, if you need additional information, we do actually cover quite a lot of that. How to get started, what's the concept, how to inject your extensions into your development environment to really start using GitHub Copilot in one of the previous modules. And then the third link is where it's really describing a lot of features, how GitHub Copilot as the generative AI tool is now becoming your AI peer programmer, somewhat helping you instead of reaching out to your colleagues, now embracing GitHub Copilot as your next powerful development colleague. So with that, we're at the end of this module. Thank you for now for being here, and allow me to invite you into one of our next course modules where you're going to learn even more features about GitHub Copilot. Thank you for now, and see you soon in the next module.